Hello, everybody. This is Trip, and I am here with Adam as part of our Black Theology reading group and a friend of the podcast and legendary scholar. Right there is Grace G. Sun Kim, and she is the editor of a brand new collection of sermons and speeches from the one and only Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is the handsome man on your screen right now.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy.
And the new collection is called Keeping Hope Alive. I have the audio version right here, perfectly built for everyone with multiple children in lockdown. And Grace has the text copy. It's quite a collection. And for those of you that know Reverend Jackson, you know that he's been a leader and pioneer in working for justice across the globe and in the United States. And we're just thrilled for you to be here and excited to get to encounter Grace again. So, Adam, why don't you kind of set the stage for where we've been and where we're going for everybody?
Yeah, thank you, Trip. We have a very special guest with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and this fits into our larger kind of course objectives by talking about the kind of arc and meaning of Black theology. As we discussed a couple weeks back, depending on how you're taking the course, is Black theology is wrestling with both the legacies of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and really trying to carve out a distinctive faith for African-American people out of those particular legacies of freedom. And we have someone who made their own independent legacy of freedom here today. Someone who's expresses the King tradition and amplified it and extended it in ways that were unimaginable, decades and decades ago. Is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and he's been gracious enough to lend his time here that we could ask him a few questions. And since Grace has actually been the one who's been working with him in terms of this great book that she put out, we'll actually have her lead our discussion.
Okay, so thank you so much, Trip and Adam. It's an honor to be on again with you. And Reverend Jackson, it's always great to do anything with you. So thank you so much for joining us in this Black Theology course. So here is the book, Keeping Hope Alive. It's now in audio, as Trip has mentioned. And this is a collection of Reverend Jesse Jackson's sermons and speeches. And it covers a wide time span. So Reverend Jackson, did you want to say a few words about the important, well, I want to just kind of point out how important the book is, but did you want to say something about how you view yourself in the whole civil rights movement and how the book captures a bit of it? No book can capture the whole spectrum of your work, but just share with us some of your thoughts.
Well, the book deals with the global dimension of our work. I mean, the 84 speeches are in that book, Brother Adam. Speech in India, in South Africa, Mandela's been let out of jail. So we're trying to show appreciation about global work. I'm rather convinced in this conversation that theology must be bigger than your culture. All that is confined by culture. When I was a little younger, he said in our churches, whoever I go, take Jesus with me. That's dangerous, because if he following you, you're not going many places. He should take you wherever he goes. Very different. If Jesus follow you, he'll say behind the bus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your theology, and oftentimes Christ is limited by culture. And part of my challenge is to get us beyond the cultural limitations of the Christian faith, to make it a universal application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you see that very well because your speeches are, as you mentioned, it's from different parts of the world, in India, in South Africa, in Asia. So we were able to capture the wide scope and the global impact that you have created in the world. Because the civil rights movement, even though it is centered here in the US, it does have a global impact because there is racism around the world. There is sexism around the world. There is homophobia, all these things. So I think, we weren't able to include everything, but even your DNC speeches, it just captures how you want to work for all people.
Well, I was able some years ago to go to South Africa in 1979 with my seminary professor, Dr. Howard Sherman, and Jack Odell. And I was naive enough to think we got to South Africa and I could ease in the country. That was when the part that was real high, doctor. And so I eased in the airport. The big bevy of press was there. Why are you here? So I'm here to, I'm afraid you're going to put me back out the country, Here to visit friends. Why are you really here? I'm here to visit South African Council churches. Oh, you just look at part-time for myself. And so finally, what's your politics? And they hear me, I say, well, human rights for all human beings. Made human rights for 1 yardstick. That's it. Big headline that says Jackson interferes in South Africa's culture. Human rights for all human beings is counterculture. Because if you put race as a criteria, gender as a criteria, you limit God in scope. Human rights for all human beings. And I remind people, Jesus Christ is his title. He doesn't come with the Christ or not Mary and Joseph, but not Christ. It's the Redeemer, the Liberator, the leader. And so the Liberator is not limited by time and space. And so I'm rather convinced that we have a moral obligation to get beyond the limitations of the gospel. I can put this out there. If you were born in the sin of limitations, shaped in this iniquity, born in sin of limitations. So if you're born in the ghetto, you meet Christ in the ghetto. You limit him to ghetto parameters. I make this case. We Black communities live in a bubble created by whites. How can I put this? Many years ago, as the African burial ground on Wall Street, right, Doctor? African burial ground. Because the biggest trading market for Africans was New York. Mm-hmm. We were the commodity exchange. And at some point, they moved us to an island called Holland. We were really inhabitants and the commodities on Wall Street. White people set up ghettos for their own purpose of exploitation. So I'm saying this to you today, that behind the walls and limitations is a theology of piety. You adjust. You go to church, you go to school, you go to work, you marry, you compete. One ghetto against another ghetto. We're limited by that. And my experience has been the ghetto theology has limitations, cultural limitations. For example, Grace, if you go to church, do everything the pastor says do. Don't drink, don't smoke, be faithful to your marriage partner, all that. That would not equal change. Words on theology of adjustment and piety. Piety, how you behave, and the cultural limitations. At some point in time, I was blessed to go beyond the limitation of our culture. So Jesus as power, not piety. Unlimited as opposed to limited. Power, not piety. When you're in a hole, you do three things, Howard Thurman would say. One, you adjust to your situation. Most people do. You resent it. You know better, but you feel you can't change it, so you just resent it. But you have to resist. And I would like to think I'm a resistor. I'm maladjusted to our environment. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, which was like the Black community was a bubble. And basketball players in a bubble in Florida. Behind the Black bubble, there was also a culture of our own religion, our own politics, our own survival techniques. The first time I saw a Black policeman, I was 20 years old. There was a Black policeman, there was a Black fireman, no Black selling goods downtown. Could go to white churches, and it was our own churches. We lived behind the walls of the bubble. Now the King led us beyond the walls of the bubble. Now, that's where the King piece fits in. Take us beyond the bubbles, the bubble walls. Most people stay behind those bubble walls.
Wow, that's just amazing, all the culture. And then Howard Thurman. I know you read Howard Thurman all the time. Who else do you refer to when you're trying to develop this Black theology? And that's exactly what Dr. Adam Clark teaches too, Black theology. So what other resources are you relying on?
Well, Dr. King is one. The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich. Love, Power, and Justice. Because when I went to seminary, Chicago Theological Seminary, so when I really took Jesus out of my pocket, he started following me wherever I went. I didn't go many places in a comparative sense. Following Jesus, you end up in the challenging monasteries and temples. You follow him, you end up going beyond your bubble, beyond your race limitations. Following Jesus, there's a good versatility in following him. And he's counterculture. It's part of culture. He's born on the death warrant and killed by the government at age 33. So to follow him is to go counterculture. It's challenge the cultural limitations. Affirm your somebodyness throughout the world. I like to think I grew up in a church setting that the emphasis was piety. How you behave, how you don't get in trouble, how you avoid the police. We finished high school and had been in a big fight and had not been arrested. He was a good boy. With the military, maybe go to college. But you go ghetto A to ghetto B, you're still limited and your religion limited. But when you start talking about Jesus is I follow now, he doesn't follow me, I follow him. He leads me in some strange places. I mean, places I would never have gone, frankly, except following him.
Can I jump in here? Reverend Jackson, the birth of Black theology began with people wrestling both with the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and with Malcolm X. Now, you as a major figure of the King movement, right, and everybody's clear about your perspective on King, I wanted to ask you, what did you think of Malcolm and how did Malcolm impact your ministry?
Well, I really want to answer that two ways. First of all, I think Black theology is much older than that. Those ministers, Mark Vesey, those ministers who fought beyond adjustment and limitations, even slavery time, that was the Black theology. It was the theology of liberation. Jesus was their guide to justice. Vernon John, the guy that preaches Dr. King at church in Montgomery. So there's always been some ministers who had a theology of liberation, and they applied Jesus to that situation. Dr. King was the most prominent because he emerged as a national figure. But some churches have been fighting beyond piety to power, beyond cultural limitations for a long time. Now, Malcolm, interesting enough, Malcolm was rather limited in life. He became a much bigger figure when he was killed in a dramatic kind of way. Malcolm came to the March on Washington, had a press conference attacking the leaders and went back to New York. He taught unity, but everything about his approach was to challenge the leaders, was to attack the leaders. So that Dr. King and Malcolm lived at the same time, roughly, 55 to 65, 68. But Dr. King's theology led him to interpret sitting in the back of the bus as degrading, organize a boycott. Not having public accommodations was degrading. The day Dr. King gave a speech in Washington, from Texas to Florida to Maryland, we couldn't use a single public toilet. We couldn't buy ice cream at Howard Johnson. We couldn't vote. We couldn't rent a room at Holiday Inn. Black soldiers sat behind Nazi POWs on American military bases and degraded. So the King fought to change those policies. Still, the 64 Civil Rights Act was a big deal. Now, the dream speech only makes sense if you ask the question the long way around. If the context, I dream of a day where we'll be judged by the character, not color by skin. We came to Washington that day. If you came from south of Washington, you had your lunchbox in your car. Stop at a friend's house with the toilet, behind cans and alleys. Humiliation. We lived in radical racial apartheid. And so he pulled his horse to the big wagon. I might add, while Malcolm, laid the groundwork for all this Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley. Rosa Parks asked Ms. Parks, why didn't you go to the back door? She said, well, every Wednesday, Attorney Fred Greer and I used to meet. We met to see how could we validate the 54 decision, which of course was the antithesis of the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. She meant to sit in. She thought God would be with her. And so Rosa Parks joins Thurgood Marshall. The King joined Rosa Parks, John Lewis joins Dr. King. 54 and 65, America changed, the law changed. We live in our faith, live under the law. And so we found ourselves for the Rights Act in 66, 65. Dr. King was into big movements, boycotts, public accommodation. Malcolm was in none of that. I sometimes cringe at the comparison between Malcolm and Dr. King. Malcolm in Harlem, that went to Wall Street, challenged Wall Street, same island as Harlem, because he was really behind the bubble. He never really broke behind the bubble and ended up getting killed arguing about Mr. Muhammad's behavior behind the bubble. His potential to grow was immense. Maybe he died before he had a chance to grow, but in his lifetime, his life was behind the bubble. Dr. King moved to end the war in Vietnam. That's beyond the bubble. Mm-hmm. Public accommodations, right to vote beyond the bubble. Today, the fruit of Dr. King's tree. You were in Montgomery, Black Me the other day, Selma, Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, Richmond, Virginia, heart of the Confederacy. Black man, St. Paul, Minnesota, Jackson, Mississippi, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia. All this is the King tree. He changed public policy. We live in our faith, we live under the law. So Malcolm, in comparison, was not a part of those major actions.
Okay. Yeah. Well, one time you made a comment on how Black preachers look at Martin for respectability and Malcolm for toughness, and then they have a Pat Robertson theology coming from the pulpit.
Yes, said that.
So what I wanted to ask you,
I don't know how you found that though, but that's very good.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how have you challenged that Pat Robertson theology in Black pulpits?
Well, you dress the church, big picture of Martin Luther King. They went to Martin Luther King movement. He was alive. They may not have allowed him in their church, by the way, but he's accessible in death. We love martyrs, not marchers. Martyrs can't challenge us. Marchers do. And instead of the picture of Malcolm, there's toughness. In the pulpit, singing the same songs with the same behavior patterns. There's nothing about a Sunday morning sermon that would lead one to challenge the walls of the bubble. Matter of fact, most of the changes took place outside of the church walls. Rosa Parks said that was not a missionary society meeting. She was an NAACP field secretary. The 54 decision led by Thurgood Marshall and Constance McCamalla. She was a woman very much in that scene, but we'll talk about that a little later. Joe Rao, Jack Greenberg. The stars in that season was John Hope Franklin giving testimony, and Kenneth Clark, Black and White Dolls, how segregation made Black feel inferior, made white feel superior. That movement laid the predicate for the new day. And even as we saw the verse of John Lewis, we missed the fact John joined the movement. He joined the movement. You never speak Mandela and Tabo without speaking about ANC. They joined the movement. John joined the movement and took it to its logical conclusion, lived 80 years long enough to do that. So I'm saying to you today that the Hagen theology was a theology of social change, not social service, not analysis of Blacks' behavior. And in a sense, you can get a lot of laughs attacking Black behavior. And you can incite the oppressor deal with Black behavior. Now, they can't deal with white behavior with a plan, with power to change it.
Mm-hmm. So you're sharing lots of wisdom and lots of history, which is so important, because if we don't know our history, and actually the sermons and speeches that are in the book have such a great wealth of historical perspective and knowledge. And I know you mentioned Nelson Mandela earlier, and I know, and I've heard you at the UN on many of the Nelson Mandela days. You were one of the speakers and you spoke. And here we have included one of them from 2013. Can you just say more about what we who live in the States can learn from what Mandela did, and I don't know if you want to say more about your relationship with Mandela.
Mandela suffered his way into prominence. Sacrifice were in the prominence. He was a Methodist by denomination, but his work came as a lawyer challenging the apartheid laws. At some point, the church embraced him, but he was suffering on Roberts Island. Scheduled to never be seen again. Became a global martyr behind the walls of Robert Island. But he came out with the moral agenda, a theology of liberation, a theology of change. You know, what makes us go into the soccer field, football field, or basketball court is, as a principle, why was we in football? It's hard to be a professional football player, basketball. Whenever the playing field is even, rules are public, goals are clear, referees are fair, and score is transparent. We can make it whenever the playing field is even, rules are public, goals clear, referee fair, and score is transparent. We make a difference. Now, the idea of getting the playing field even is a theology, because we're just to uneven field of limitations. We're born in the sin of limitations, shaped in its iniquity. We must break out of the limitations of our birth.
You know, many people were first introduced to Black theology in 2007 with the Jeremiah Wright controversy during the Barack Obama campaign. And I was wondering, since all of you guys are from Chicago and know each other very well, what was your interpretation of that conflict between Jeremiah Wright and Barack Obama? And how did it impact the Black church?
Well, Jeremiah Wright preached the same sermons he had preached while Barack was a member of his church. But what is said in church without the cameras out, when it does not threaten the white people, is acceptable. You can say what you want to say. But once you move into the realm of public policy, there's different impact. You talk about like behavior and what we should do and all that. But when you start talking about, I'm going to be the president, how did that affect everybody? So when Jeremiah Wright said, God damn America, he meant the root is condemn America. You reap what you sow. God is not marked, reap what you sow. And that our sins come to haunt us. Malcolm called it chickens coming home to roost. And I argue over and over again that our servants are servants even the playing field. So everybody, we must not limit our theology about race, about geography. So when Jeremiah Wright began to preach a liberating theology, offensive to white churches and the white society, he had said that he had been saying all the while. The longer you preaching these powerful sermons behind the closed walls, stay in your bubble, it's all right. When you start bringing up your bubbles, we're going to sit, we want to sit on the bus. Rosa Parks was arrested. The bus driver was right. according to his theology, above the driver's head, the sign read, "Pillar from the rear, whites in front, those who violate be punished by law." And she decided to burst out the bubble. And they arrested her. I said, "Ms. Fox," one I said, "You made the decision to test the case. 3 women on the bus got, and those drivers, and they got off. Why you sit there?" She said, "Well, I thought about getting up. I thought about Emmett Till. I couldn't go back." Emmett Till spoke to her from the grave. After this was December 1st, Emmett Till killed August 28th. He spoke to her from the grave. And so, there's a piece about theological work right there, challenging unjust laws. And part of modern theology was challenging unjust laws. Malcolm was in New York talking about he wouldn't take dogs biting him in Birmingham. Well, he wasn't in Birmingham. We took the dog bite and transformed it into emancipation. We were trying to look into an asset. When Jim Clark hit CTV in the mouth and he bled in Selma, that blood helped free us. When the horses and the dogs beat John Lewis, helped us. So the revolution of nonviolence is counterculture. The culture says fight back with a stick. Counterculture is just to have a higher calling. And modern, you look at those 13 years of modern public accommodation bill from the back of the bus. The day he gave the speech in Washington, by the way, he and John, I said, from Texas around to Maryland, we couldn't do anything except on the reach of the walls. But my mom was fighting to bring those barriers down. Malcolm had a press conference degrading the black leaders who were there. They were misleading them. He was not part of those movements. The movement for the right to, I think he came to Selma one day. He didn't march, he came to the church one day. But he was not a part of the Selma movement. And was killed for the fair housing drive. Not a part of the anti-Vietnam movement. So Dr. King's theology of liberation, theology of change, and Jeremiah Wright was really in the King tradition of liberation theology. Not limiting your mission to private piety.
So everything, if you put it into context, makes so much sense. So what Jeremiah Wright was preaching is what many preachers will be preaching. So thank you for giving that insight. There's just so much to learn and so many other questions to ask you. I know Tripp had 1 million and we just hijacked everything from Tripp. So I'm sure Tripp has questions to ask you too.
Well, one of the things that I remember in a sermon or a talk that Reverend Jackson gave in 2008 that's in the book is a phrase. You said, we weren't beyond racism with the election of Barack Obama, but we were beyond Selma. And in light of the changes that have happened since 2008, post-Obama, Trump, and then the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, how would you describe the present situation?
The present situation is that we have power, political power. The fact that they are now looking for an African-American woman to be a vice president.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Reflects about power. If they choose Susan Rice, Kamala can be a Supreme Court. Choose Kamala, Susan can be Secretary of State. You have this great body of women who are mayors of Atlanta and Washington. Women taking their rightful place in public policy. And we applaud that advance of female leadership. It must be in the church as well as in the streets, frankly.
Yeah, and even in Chicago, you have a woman mayor, woman attorney general too. And I don't know, all the leaders in Chicago seems like they're all Black women.
State's attorney, Kim Scott,
okay.
State's attorney.
Yeah.
And Mayor Laura Lightfoot, woman mayor in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in New Orleans, Louisiana. There's this women asserting themselves in ways that are different than historic.
And so actually just moving into the topic of women, how do you view women's leadership within the church?
It must be bolder. Bolder? Women there's kind of double-edged sword here. Black women, 75% of the Black church attendance and choirs and all, ushers and all that. But there's something about women trying to let their men have a place. The society's been so rough on black men. Like black women have been our cushion. Been our protector. Black women were raped, black men were hung. Reason why, as I looked at what we do, we reflect rape. You know, the first white man condemned for raping a black woman was 1959. Mm. We would comfort women 240 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow. White men just chose us and had babies with us. What happened with the Thurman and his daughter was typical, not unusual. I said, we're not Africans, we're not Europeans, we're Negroes, not Negroes. We're new people born of raped and rapist relationship. And that's who we are. The duality of our consciousness and our culture. You're looking for a friendly monument. Look at me. You're looking for a miracle. Look at me. And somehow we must stress our theology into the change that we see.
You know, could you mention, there have been so many women who have been black women who have been unacknowledged in just the civil rights movement or the Black freedom movement at large. And I'm wondering if there's some women that the general public does not know about that we should know. And I'm wondering, can you identify and talk about discuss their significance?
Attorney Constance Baker Motley. We talk about Thurgood Marshall. She was right by his side as a lawyer, as a law professor. Constance Baker Motley. You fast forward to Rosa Parks. She had the courage to sit in. In 64, after 63 March, we were talking about applying our knowledge. Lou Hamer led the demonstration at the Democratic Convention, 64. Dr. King and others, they were the liberals. They were Johnson and Mundell and Hubert Humphrey. And she's Mississippi. She said, whites don't represent Mississippi. Mississippi Democrat Party.
That's right.
And she took that position, and she called many black leaders who would, we must be Goldwater at all costs. There's danger of getting trapped in politics. It's one thing to say we must beat Trump, but you might have demands on Biden that make sense too. She said, we want Johnson over Goldwater, but in the meantime, it means all white delegation from Mississippi. I ain't with that deal. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's where they came from. When she led that struggle. In 57, Little Rock 9, Daisy Bates, black publisher, led that struggle. Daisy Bates was Maryland. The name comes this in the in fact, it's right down the line. Dorothy Height noticed the absence of speaking on the platform at the convention and at the rally in Washington. But you know, we also grow. Dr. King was, Jack O'Dell was heading our Southern registration, and Bob Russell was the key organizer. He said Jack O'Dell was a communist. He had to back up from the movement, say he was a communist. He said Bob Russell is gay. He had to step down. Well, we've grown beyond that now. That was just part of our story. It's not cultural limitations. But the Constance Baker Motley was a big deal. Rosa Parks was a big deal. Lou Hamer was a big deal. Daisy Bates was a big deal. Dr. Mary France Barrett, first black woman president of the University of Colorado. Attorney General Lynch. We were demonstrating in Greensboro, North Carolina when I was at A&T. Her church was a church, she was a little girl. Her father, Reverend Lynch, was the pastor of the Providence Church in Greensboro, and she was in that church. Became Attorney General. So down through the years, we've had women leadership, but as we evolved in appreciating the limitation of just men. Woman mayor in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, 19 black female judges in Houston, Texas. Went to Houston, Texas one time with Dr. King and Andy Young and Harry Belafonte, and Aretha Franklin was doing a tour for Dr. King, raising money for SCLC. Dr. King stepped on the stage to give Aretha some flowers. They put tear gas in the fans. We had to evacuate the building.
Wow.
Aretha Franklin was doing 3 concerts at the time. And so there has a black man named Mel Sylvester. Dallas, Texas. Why was nobody killed in these vast demonstrations? Because humane, civilized males said, don't kill. Daley said shoot to kill in Chicago in 1968. These women took a very different position on that. And black, so we live in a culture that is more acceptable of women leadership and gays and the like. We expand our horizons.
Yeah, one follow-up on that. You were one of the first Black ministers to publicly embrace the LGBTQ community back in the 80s. I was wondering, what type of resistance did you get from your fellow clergy? And then how did you transcend or overcome that?
Well, I told Senator, if I come to your church one Sunday morning, your choir half empty, no musicians, I know you're preaching about gays. And church full of gay people, the musicians, the ushers, some of them are
preachers too.
And ministers too. That's my point. And so I was sitting in front of the minister's church 3 years ago at Christmas time. He was preaching about joy to the world, all kind of joy, and there'll be there's sex joy, and there's Christian joy, and there's perverse gay joy. He started preaching about gays. People who were screaming loud, go Reverend, we're gays. I said to my friend, I said, that will not last long. Because the guy who was directing his choir was a gay had been to Broadway, and he was so good. He just was singing and had the choir moving. And all the gay people in church, and their consciousness was such they were willing to take that abuse. We broke out our bubble. You can't preach that kind of sermon on gays anymore because we're beyond the bubble. When people grow, they change. When you put
I have
walls
to use that image of the bubble.
Well, I guess the basketball guys are behind the bubble. The ghetto's behind the bubble, behind the coastal bubble. And if you live in that bubble long enough, for example, we never aspired to be a city council person. We're no black city councilman behind the bubble. State legislator, U.S. senator, governor. That's not in the bubble. We were not bankers. Didn't miss being a bank teller. No black bus drivers, Trailway or Greyhound, or city buses. We learn to live behind the bubble. And if your theology reinforces bubble, then you're limiting the power of God and the mission of the church. You must not accept bubbles that lock out humanity. I went to Luther Vandross's funeral in New York some time ago. Every top producer, writer of songs in the world was in Riverside Church. Overwhelmingly gay people who write the music and produce. So who are we to limit who God gives gifts to? God is not limiting his gifts. It's not right, it's not fair. Doesn't make sense to do that.
And even your coalition, the Rainbow Coalition, it feels like a very prophetic kind of name that you chose back then to kind of bring everybody together, because it's not just the Black community that you fight for. You also fight for the Asian community, the Hispanic community, all the the LGBTQ community. So
what happened was that we decided to run in 84. Really, running was not on my mind, Doc Adams. What happened was that I was doing a Sunday morning radio show, and someone called in and said, you should boycott Chicago Fest, Jane Byrne, she used the platform of Chicago Fest as a Queen's coronation. Given how she behaved, we should boycott it. One mind said it's impractical for you to make the record. Who can boycott Chicago Fest? Free music, Stevie Wonder, the O'Jays, or Dutta, and all these people. Proud Dogs, free beer. How you boycott Chicago Fest? My spirit said, if it's right, it can't be wrong. If it's right, God will fight your battle. If God fights your battle, then he's trying to quite an ally. So we met in Chicago and pushed on a Wednesday morning. Broad cross section said, enough is enough. They gave me the assignment of challenging the artists not to cross our picket line. Others had different assignments. I was able to get Stevie Wonder, whom I related to not cross the picket line. The Stevie wouldn't cross the picket line. The other artists wouldn't cross the picket line. Out of that movement came the cry for a black mayor. Harold Washington came to picket line one day. Harold said, I tell you, I don't want to run for mayor. The Congress have a good job. We said, Harold, you have to do it. Harold said, tell you what, if you all put $250,000 on the table, 50,000 new votes, I know you're serious. 50,000 new votes, put $500,000 on the table. Where's 400,000 votes? Harold had to run. Harold broke that barrier down because we heard the voice. Now, I don't know whether the guy was gay or straight. It was just a voice. And that's why the Good Samaritan means so much to me. A man walking down the street and was attending his business, robbed, left to die. And while dying, he looked up and saw a man of his own religion. Rabbi, minister, man of God. He knew there was relief coming. On the side of the street, Bible in one hand, prayer book in the other, looking at heaven and going to hell. But then another man of his own ethnic group, my blood brother, the Levite came, left him to die. Samaritan from another country, another culture, who worship God differently. He helped him up. Who is my neighbor? Is the Samaritan of a different race, different culture, worship God differently? Is it, you may call him Allah, while I call him God? So that sermon takes a big meaning for me. It's one of the great global statements about the neighbor. And I've sought to be a neighbor. And one thing I do know is that if your ministry is limited to reciprocity, if you're limited to you help those who help you, that's a small ministry. Because this says sow seeds. Some into rock, some into wind, some germinate. You can't count the seeds as they fall. Your theology be bigger than your culture. Christ bigger than your culture. The language is different, message the same. When I'm in Poland or Mississippi, people say, I am somebody. It's self-affirmation all around the world. Japan or Jamaica.
And thanks for that affirmation. And in the book, the foreword is by Reverend Otis Moss Jr., who was part of the movement too. And then the afterword is Eddie Glaude, Dr. Glaude, who teaches at Princeton. But those who are interested in the book, I think one of the jewels in the book is Reverend Jackson's concluding thoughts. So I won't be able to cover that today, but I'm just hoping that everybody will read it, because there you will find out, where he got keeping hope alive phrase. And that's how we kind of named the book. So I think the conclusion, your speeches and sermons are fabulous, but the conclusion, because it's such an intimate kind of talk and your thoughts kind of from 2019, because that was written in 2019, I think that's worth the read. So I hope people can get the audio and the text.
Whatever was Grace, Dr. King was killed in Memphis. We determined
I didn't want you to share it. I didn't want you to share it all.
Let one bullet kill our movement. We went to Washington. We were prepared to go to Washington to have a poor people's demonstration to put focus on, to make poor people visible. And to go to Washington, to go to jail, to go to demonstrate civil disobedience. That's we got sidetracked by Memphis. Since I was in Washington, Reverend Abdat asked me to be the mayor of Resurrection City. Every morning I would come out to a little makeshift town, I would give instructions. This one morning I was there, and it had been raining. It rained every day. We done that in mud. And we were very depressed. Dr. King had been killed April 4th. Robert Kennedy killed June the 6th. We didn't know what to do. So I'm on the back of the truck. People looking at me, most of women and children. Most men had left the camp by the time. I had no money to give them, no bus fare to go home. White House had turned his back on it. Dr. King was not there, and Robert Kennedy was not in the Capitol. And so I was searching for something. I said, "Well, I am somebody." I read Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman said, "It's your irreducible essence. You're still God, so you matter." I said, "I am somebody." And it took off. I may be poor, but I may be on wealth. I may be unskilled. And I found that self-affirmation theme rings around the world where we go, because people are in quest of their somebodyness and in their hope. We're in the age of 88. We were doing very well. We lost New York. A lot of reasons, but we lost New York. And some staff members wanted to give up. I imagine they giving concession speeches. We had to go across the country. We were not just a political, we were a movement for justice. So I said, we can't keep hope alive. And I found between somebodyness and keeping hope alive, we have power. And in the real sense, our religion must not limit us to culture, to the bubble. Those who dare challenge the walls of the bubble, you meet resistance. You lose your job, you lose your life, you lose your public standing. But you have to go beyond the limitations. If Jesus had just stayed, in Bethlehem and preaching in Galilee, it wouldn't matter about it. He challenged the corruption in the temple, challenged the oppression of Rome. He messed up the arrangement. He was challenging the walls of limitations. He was born in a bubble, born in sin, shaped in iniquity. He became bigger than himself. It's like the coefficient of expansion. You got to get bigger than yourself. I think our theology is best makes us bigger than ourselves. And we go to seminary, reading Bonhoeffer and reading Tillich, meeting Howard Thurman, knew Dr. King. It took me to a different place of seeing the world and not accepting the limitations of my orientation.
Yeah, so much history lesson and so much theological things to think about. So, wow. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that.
Now, Reverend Jackson, there was at John Lewis's funeral, Bill Clinton got up and talked about SNCC and made a kind of a distinction between the legacy of John Lewis and of Kwame Ture, right? And he talked basically very praiseworthy things about John Lewis, of course, but he diminished kind of Kwame Ture. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you thought of those remarks and about the legacy of Kwame Ture in terms of, or the legacy of SNCC, I should say, in terms of its significance to the struggle and the legacy of Kwame Ture after that.
When the movement 55, and we sat in Greensboro February 1st, 1960, and broke out around the country and it swarmed SNCC for the rest of the spring of 1960. They joined the movement, SCLC and AACP, Urban League Corps. They joined the movement. They were part of it. That's why John spoke at Washington at the monument in August 28th. The youth don't object to it. They weren't playing generational games. We all want a public accommodation. We all want to overcome the humiliation and the indignities of our situation. And so John was a part of that. At some point, Soto and those guys had a meeting one night in Selma to pull John out of office, a coup of sorts. They wanted to go another route, a more independent route. Well, it's fraught with difficulty. You go outside, the media will take you out there. Dr. King is old, young, let you talk for a while. What's your support base? If it's not the Black church, not Black labor, like I said, where's your base? He's like you floated out the foundation. So Stokely and those guys raised the right concerns, Black power, raised our consciousness. The reason I became so close to Stokely and all that, because breadbasket was what they were talking. Breadbasket, we were putting Black products on the shelves and building Black chains so put money in Black base. We developed Black power without the inciting language. We were just building Black power. When we come, they tell we need Black power, which means Black people should consume and be producers, not just consumers, and invest in ourselves and develop our own power. But the language was, at that time, Dr. King wrote a chapter in his book on defining Black power. So I think Stokely made his contribution because he raised the consciousness. And then Stokely left, went back to Guinea, and rap ended up in trouble. And the kind of trouble he's still in jail today. So John Lewis stayed with the heart of things. And I appreciate both of my friends. I went to see Kwame Ture in the hospital in Guinea, and he was dying. I went to visit his graveyard a few years ago and cleaned it up because I cared so deeply for him. But if you're going to lead the struggle, you must define the struggle. The struggle was for public accommodations. If you lived in Mississippi or Maine, Black people could not have public dignity. That's what this fight was about. And we were gaining white allies to make it happen. After we're a minority in a majority situation. It was learning the skills to coordinate. For example, when George Floyd was killed, I went to meet with the county prosecutor about arresting officers. He said, we can't arrest officers because they're protected by the FOP and all that. Keith Ellison took over the next day. Keith then died all four of them. Minnesota may be 5% Black at most, or less than that. He's the state attorney general, because he understood coalition. So some of the Che Guevara models and stuff don't fit our situation here. John helped lead the movement to public in 64 and 65 at the Congress, lead the Congress with Southern consciousness. So I'm not sure that Bill should try to make the comparison. I'm not sure it's his place to make that comparison. Mm-hmm. But certainly a different role. And for young people who were excited, he was an exciting guy. very talented. And I think he made a contribution.
Mm-hmm. And most people don't realize that you were the one who actually changed the name of, at least the New York Times, of people from calling us Black to African American, right? Which is kind of reflective of both legacies.
What happened was we were in a meeting in Chicago after the campaign, and I always believed we had to change cultural things as well. African American gives us beyond the ghetto status, where we're not limited to skin color. After all, the Rainbow Coalition, either came from, I go to the convention, Blacks protesting civil rights, the Hills protesting bilingual education, Native Americans protesting land, all that. So together we were at the Rainbow Coalition. So it seemed to me that we had the right need to internationalize ourselves, to globalize ourselves. And African American had been around for a long time in relatively smaller circles. But we took it to the mainstream. It became a big debate for a while, as you recall. Mm-hmm. People say Black sounds better. We went from color to Negro to Black to African American. We kept evolving. If we had not done that, the Museum of Science, History in Washington would be the Black Museum. It's the African American Museum. Mm-hmm. We had a case in 88, where Walters was about it, others. We won an argument.
Well, Reverend Jackson, you're the one who pushed for the term African American, right?
Yeah, but also along that same line, going to get Americans out of prison in foreign countries. I think that the civil rights movement in America has currency global worldwide. So I had met in some of the independent international movements, the leaders of Syria.
Yeah, you got Goodman out there from Syria, right?
Reagan really called about people being locked in the embassy. I figured if 2 soldiers died, one white, one black, the white was killed and the black was left, you may leave them there for a long time as war bait. So we went to see the ambassador of Syria. He let us go. I figured if we got in, we'd get him. But again, going beyond the boundaries, and Iraq and Cuba and Yugoslavia, because I went to South Africa in 1979. I believe that we must fight for life beyond the bubble. Our theology cannot be limited to black theology. Black theology has its roots in a soulful way of overcoming odds, but we shouldn't be limited by the color of our culture. Our culture is the foundation for which we spring. Our deep held beliefs in that culture. I believe in Jesus Christ as part of our culture. But Jesus was not limited just to Jews only. We cannot be limited just to blacks only.
So one of the things that strikes me about a lot of the stories you've told us that they're from the early part of your career, and your vocation was both ministerial and civil rights activism and as a politician. And when I was 2, you first ran for president. I was just 2 years old. And when I was 2, you were advocating for the inclusion of LGBT people, the recognition of our Muslim citizens, inclusion across different ethnic groups. You were a vocal advocate for people with that are differently abled. You were the first presidential candidate, advocating for a robust national health care system. So many things that you continued to do after the kind of birth of civil rights movement are now normal things to hear people in the Democratic Party say. And yet, until I learned the story, I grew up where Democrats were, the Clinton version, and those type of things were, radical, and we don't suggest it. And so when I mentioned to one of my, I guess I couldn't say their name since this is on Facebook, but a certain family member that I was getting to talk to a hero, and he said, "Which one?" I said, "Reverend Jesse Jackson." He said, "I spent 30 years thinking he was a radical and wrong, and now I just wish I could go back in time and switch my vote." and I think there's a lot of people in this moment that are recognizing that you were 20, 30 years ahead of in seeing what justice looks like on the ground. So I want to say thank you. And could you just give us some wisdom of how we learn to see with that the edge of justice in our present, in our situation?
Well, some people have to get to the corner to sit around the curve.
Mm-hmm.
The faith, something hope for, you may not sit around, you may not be at the corner. Believe around the curve is a bright day. Believe around the curve is a better world. Some people see it as believing. But faith is a factor. Substance of things hoped for. Evidence of things unseen. And I've seen enough change in my lifetime to feel good about it now. But I went to Greenville, South Carolina. I couldn't apply to Clemson. I went to the University of Illinois to play football. Well, the next year, Harvard began with the Clemson, with federal guards. Arthur Lewison with Alabama, federal guards. So when Clemson plays Alabama in a big football game, I see a whole different world. Clemson, black quarterback, Alabama, black quarterback. When Moore ran against Jones in the Senate race, and Jones beat Moore and Trump, blacks, he won Tuscaloosa, Alabama, University of Alabama. He won the county where Auburn is. Because we're winning this battle. I mean, Trump is a Caesar. God's our secret judge. I think that most people, and John talking about thinking violence is weak and violence is strong. Violence is weak. You've exhausted all you can do. Nonviolence is countercultural. It's redemptive. It takes courage. It takes risk. Nonviolence can neutralize guns. I mean, in the face of nonviolence, armies get weak. What can they do but guard us? If we had a shootout, we could win the shootout. The shootout is impractical and threatening and bluffing about guns. Get you killed without any return on the killing. If you die for the movement, you get returns. If you die as a martyr in the movement, it's worth the death. If you die for the hell of it, then there's no point to it. Nonviolence means you use your body as a living sacrifice. The other thing I found out, taking you guys time, always do this some more. I look forward to talking to you guys some more. You have a wall between two people. On the side of the wall is ignorance, fear, hatred, and violence. You don't know who's behind the wall. Fear what you're ignorant of. You learn to hate what you're afraid of, and you become violent. The walls come down, you see people as for what they're worth. We were on the side of the wall where the sun didn't shine much, so we couldn't grow. I like a growth that means something wrong with us. It meant that photosynthesis and rain is affecting your growth. If we're on the shady side, we can't grow. If we have no sunshine, we can all grow when the walls come down. Part of my mission in life is pulling down walls. My mother was dying in the hospital some years ago. I was in Greenville, South Carolina, and so I would go every day, and the white people said, "You ever have prayer with us?" One woman, she met me downstairs in the lobby. She said, "Will you pray for my family? My husband is quite sick, but put him at the hospital, and my son has his leg amputated and don't have insurance." I said, "Yeah, I pray." I said, "I'll go upstairs." And no, I don't need to go upstairs. Just pray for him down here. She didn't want me to go upstairs. Now, Jess, I like you very much now. I'm not with that Obamacare business. That affordable health care. I said, "Man, you want almond without the eggs." I mean, she had been poisoned to believe that affordable health care was against her interests. That's all I'm trying to say. And the theology is not limited. We keep going behind these walls. The theology does not accept walls. I mean, the best of theology. And liberation is whether you are in Central America or whether you're in a ghetto. Black theology is theology of changing your condition. Define the law of limitations. Defining the laws, the walls that put you in shade doesn't have sunshine. So it's named Black theology. It's really liberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not often do we get a chance to speak to someone who's not just a intellectual theoretician of the movement, but actually a change maker and history maker. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your wisdom. Is there anything else that anybody wants to say?
Where are you teaching?
I'm teaching at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Man, let me come to your class sometime. Don't
Oh, definitely.
Don't ban me.
You know who?
Well,
let me tell you this on camera. I actually had Aubrey Hendricks reach out to you about maybe 2 years ago to do that, but something fell through.
The Politics of Jesus may be the most influential book in my whole career. The Politics.
Yeah.
I saw Jesus. I saw Jesus different. I saw Jesus different from that book. Aubrey Hendricks is my number one theologian.
Yeah.
Actually, that Politics of Jesus, there was an AR session, I don't know, in Texas. I think that was 5 years ago. Actually, Reverend Jackson was on the panel. I don't know if you were there. Yeah, he was there. Yeah. So
I think that was
he loves
California. I was there, yeah.
I forget which country.
San Diego.
San Diego.
It was San Diego.
Okay, wherever, yeah. Were you at that panel? Because Reverend Jackson.
Yes, I was at that panel too. And I met Reverend Jack. I've talked to Reverend Jack. Actually, we went to one of the sessions at the AAR together. He probably doesn't remember, but it was a few years.
Man, let me come to Cincinnati and Xavier spend some time with you, man. I love that.
It's done. We might do a video. We might do a video because of COVID, but we will definitely have you in the classroom
soon.
Yes. I'm gonna get your number from Grace, and we'll work that out. You heard it, Grace.
Yeah,
he gave you permission.
Yeah.
Tripping with Trip.
Triple with Trip.
Trip said Edinburgh, so we'll go to Edinburgh when this pandemic's over. That's what we'll do, okay? Trip, we'll do it all in person one day.
You got to come when it's sunny.
We'll have to come in the summertime. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Reverend Jackson. It was so, we know you're busy and you got a whole full schedule. I know he had a meeting just before this one, so thank you so much for spending this time with us.
I feel so honored today. I'm so honored.
No, and every time, I've heard a lot of things, but always I learn something new. So today, that bubble image is going to stay with me. So I'll have to work on that bubble image now.
And our bubble, we had our boyfriends, girlfriends. We played ball, went to school, went to church, and weddings, funerals, and we lived behind the. And we learned to find the glory in our bubble. The problem in the bubble is limited because white people set the bubble up for exploitation and degradation. So behind the bubble, you have joy and happiness, same as other people have. You know who can play ball, who can't. Who can preach, who can't, who can sing, who can't. But you don't aspire to become legislator, governor behind the bubble. U.S. Senator behind the bubble. The bubble has built-in limitations. If your theology is built around the bubble, the bubble theology is limited to how you get along. How can you make it?
Yeah.
And one of these days it'll be all over. You go into a heavenly place and all that. The bubble theology says stay safe. Liberation, I'll say, take the risk.
Right.
Once somebody said, Jim Malcolm Martin, is that Malcolm would take a group of guys in Holland was ready to fight. We're going to take it no more. We're going to fight back. Hit me, I hit them back, and we'll do the right thing. And then leave one night. She said, "Oh man, Malcolm really got him told that, man. His brother so told it, didn't they?" No, the king did get a group of scared deacons in church, and but Jesus better cross alone on the road, go free. Jesus, MMS Bridges Calvary. We're going up this hill. Dr. King preached fight in people. So Malcolm preached fight out of people. Preach fight in them. You follow Martin, you follow Jesus, you're going to go across Birmingham, MMS Bridge, you're going to Vietnam War. You preach fight in people. Does that make sense to you? You get people, you preach fight out of them. Say all the right things. And you're permitted to get white people told behind the bubble. And say things that is entertaining behind the bubble.
Yeah. And it's great to have white friends. Like Tripp is a fantastic friend and an ally. So he's always here for us people of color and all the liberation, Black, Asian theology. So thank you so much, Tripp, for always hosting these fantastic podcasts.
On the Black Lives Matter, Tripp is Black. See, Black Lives Matter not just a color. Black Lives Matter is a way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
So more white people marching than blacks in Black Lives Matter.
True.
Small town USA, whites march. They too. They're saying oppression is wrong. Racism is skin idolatry, skin worship. Some God made an ontological error when he made a black man. God made a mistake. Racism is unscientific. It's politically divisive, economic exploitative. Racism is mental illness. If you sit and then, so when people say something unkind, I say, man, sick, not as a fear.
Yeah.
But it's sick to be healed. And I'm simply saying to you today, my friends, do not let racism break your spirit. We put shame in racism. There was a time when people bragged about white, right, this and that. We put shame in racism. And nobody wants to be a racist now. I grew up with the Soprano Index, proved Banks had a small brain. They taught racism in the universities, Columbia, Harvard. In the apartheid came out of Howard, not Harvard. It's interesting. Harvard had all of the books, all the professors, all the writers, all the double picture. It's Howard, not Harvard, was the law that changed America. Howard, not Harvard.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was liberation law. Liberation law.
Yeah.
Not just let me alone law. I have a right to the big bubble. All right, guys.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you so much again, Reverend Jackson, and thank you, Adam and
so
Trip.
much.
Deeply
This has been
appreciated.